In a world where anything is possible, in a world where the normal and the paranormal reside, Almost Unbelievable brings to you the stories you want to hear, but fear to hear. Join us in the pit.
Welcome to the Almost Unbelievable podcast with Cats and Ranty. I'm Cat. Are you there, Ranty?
I am Cats. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Ranty, and I've got a question for you. How often do you play the National Lottery?
I've played it quite a lot, probably 1,000 times perhaps since its inception.
And have you ever won the National Lottery? Maybe a strange question.
Unfortunately, no. I'm probably the most unlucky person that you can come across. I've never even won £10, Cat.
But what about if using just the power of your mind alone, you could influence the order the numbers came out of the machine? Would you try that?
If it was going to give me a better chance of winning, absolutely.
So you may be wondering where I'm going with this. Well, you may or may not be familiar with a TV series called The Paranormal World of Paul McKenna, which was shown on terrestrial TV in the United Kingdom in 1997. And one of those episodes was about the lottery, and Paul McKenna urged all his viewers to pick the same 6 lottery numbers for the following week's lottery, and to try just that, to try and use the power of their minds to will those balls into existence, to see if they could influence the lottery results. Now, out of the 6 numbers he told his audience to pick, how many do you think actually came up on the actual lottery?
Well, seeing as you've put me in this situation, I'm going to take a stab at this and say 2 of the numbers.
And you know what? You are going to be right. 2 of the numbers did come up. But not only just 2 of the main 6 numbers, but also the bonus ball as well. So out of the 7 balls that were drawn, he managed to choose 3. Now, what do you think the chances are of choosing 2 balls of the main 6 and a bonus ball?
Probably not that high, actually, because I can recall on the one hand the amount of times that I've ever had 2 numbers. So probably 1 in 50.
Yeah, you're actually on fire today, Ranty. The actual answer is about 2.8%, so you're not far off. Well done. And although some people might say Paul McKenna's little trick was a failure because he didn't win the lottery, I would say that getting 2 balls and the bonus ball out of those 7 balls was actually quite an interesting result. And our guest today also delves into the world of what some people might call magic. What can you tell us about him?
Well, today we are joined by Ken. Ken is a Wiccan, and he's going to talk about the pagan path, or the path that he's chosen. So with that, let me introduce the guest today, Ken. Ken, are you there?
My name's Ken. I have a YouTube channel called Hellbound Heathen, and I'm on Twitter as Lylocan ACS. People can find links from my YouTube channel.
Absolutely. They'll be in the description. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because all the things that I do in my other avenues in life tend to be based on science and maths, etc. And this is really kind of out of my field of experience. So for somebody like me who's a complete layperson that doesn't know anything about what you do, can you kind of like fill someone like me in on what it is you do?
Yeah, certainly. So again, my name is Ken. My full name is Lylocan. I have a YouTube channel called Hellbound Heathen. My channel, I pretty much debunk a lot of conspiracies that are focused around people like myself who are an occultist, who practice witchcraft, who follow a pagan path. But as for my personal practice, I am an occultist, so that means that I study, a lot of unusual and kind of bizarre, maybe fringe type beliefs and ideas and superstitions and various things like that. I have been initiated as a witch along the Gardnerian path, if your viewers or your listeners are familiar with that. Gerald Gardner was a person who sort of reintroduced or started, depending upon your point of reference, what we now know as Wicca, which is a form of witchcraft, kind of a modern reinterpretation and a resurgence or a reintroduction of an older path, or what people believe to be a more older path. However, the evidence is kind of sparse. So a lot of stuff kind of like the New Age sort of crept in there, and a lot of people started adopting beliefs and practices that may not have actually matched what their ancestors or what our ancestors practiced before Christianity sort of took a foothold in Western Europe. So So the path that I practice is also called a pagan path. There's all kinds of various paths out there, but my particular path, I try to reconnect with my ancient ancestors, what my ancient ancestors believed, but I also try to make it a modern path. I try to make the path fit for me today. Like, what does it mean to connect with nature nowadays? And I mean, I live in a city. It's kind of difficult to really connect with nature when you're surrounded by cement and junkies. That's pretty much how I would describe my path.
So, Ken, for someone like me who's a bit confused by all this, it all seems very new. Can you please explain to me what the difference between a Wiccan and a witch is, please?
There there isn't much of a difference. The two words are etymologically similar. Wicca is pronounced Witcha, and that's an old Anglo. I think it's Old Saxon. I think it's an Old Saxon term for a male witch, and then there was a witchin, which was a female witch. But now, modern English, we eliminated the genders and we just call it witch. So, you could have male witches, you could have female witches. They're all witches. But Wicca is witchcraft. It's just a different form. Again, like I mentioned earlier, there are people who have various practices, under this large umbrella term of occult or pagan. You have people who practice druidry or modern druids, modern witchcraft, modern paganism, modern magicians, modern ceremonial magicians. You have hermeticists, alchemists, Rosicrucians, Thelemites, even Satanists, Luciferians, and so you have a large, wide range of people who fall under this kind of umbrella term. But for myself in particular, yes, like I had mentioned earlier, I study Wicca, which is a form of witchcraft. There are other types of witches out there who don't identify with the particular path of witchcraft that Gardner introduced, and maybe they're a reconstructionist, maybe they're doing their own research and trying to look back in the past as to how people practice witchcraft. There's no real records of it. There was no school of witchcraft that survived for thousands of years since the Middle Ages. Or at least there's people who believe that there might have been. However, I try to stick to evidence, and there's just no evidence that I've come across saying that there is a tradition that is carried on up until this day.
To class yourself as a witch or a Wiccan, are there certain things that you have to be doing on a regular basis that make you a witch or a Wiccan? Or is it a belief system, not necessarily a set of practices?
There's no real dogma in any of these pagan paths. And when I say pagan path, just so your listeners understand, I'm talking about that broad canopy that I mentioned earlier. Yeah, there is no dogma. You can't do it wrong. you know, if you have a belief that's kind of outside maybe the norm of, let's say, a witch circle, no one's going to treat you differently. No one's going to say that you're not a witch. Just because maybe you have a different belief than other people. But as for myself, yeah, there's a daily devotionals that I do, which is when I meditate on a regular basis. I think meditation is really good for not only calming yourself, it also helps you to focus and to be able to concentrate for a certain period of time, which is very, very important for, I'm sure we'll talk about this later on, but if you're going to be practicing magic, and that's magic spelled Magick, to differentiate it from stage magic. So, as a Wiccan, you do have a set script or a set liturgy or set rituals that most people follow. It's very much a group based practice. So, I will meet with other witches and we will get together and we will, observe ritual passages of time, or if needed, which is actually rather rare, if we need to do, quote unquote, spell work. But most of the time, we get together around seasonal festivals. For example, right now we have upcoming the Yule, which is the winter solstice, which will be around December 21st. And then, we have various festival dates. The big four is Samhain, which is around November 1st. Then we have August 1st, which is Lunasa, May 1st, which is Beltane, and February 1st, which is Imbolc. And then we also observe the solstices and the equinoxes. So that would be the fall equinox and the spring equinox and the summer solstice and the winter solstice. Obviously, in southern hemisphere, they're flipped around. So our winter solstice is the southern hemisphere's summer solstice. So if you live in southern hemisphere, your seasonal festivals are a little different than ours. I think that explains.
So, Ken, you've mentioned spellwork and you've mentioned that it can be ritualized, especially for yourself. But can you tell us a bit more about that, please? And maybe can you tell us what you could expect to achieve with it?
There are different theories of how magic works. People have different theories. Again, this is stuff that you can't put it in a laboratory. You can't weigh it. You can't measure it. You can't really record it. There's no way to, in my opinion, scientifically prove that magic exists. It's very conceptual. Let's say that you're looking for work, or let's say you have a test coming up. You may do a spell work to give yourself confidence, or to somehow you believe through some sort of action that you take, you will influence the outcome, or you will change the outcome of a particular event. So you would do spell work for that, let's say to gain confidence, so that when you go out and you look for work, that you show a certain confidence when you're out there looking for work. Or you might do a spell to gain the ability to be able to focus and retain more information, so that when you go in for that test, that you have a better chance of passing that test. Now, there's several different ways you can perceive how that particular form of magic works. One person might say, let's say another witch might say, well, what happens is that you've actually influenced and you've changed a reality, and that caused you to, say, get that job or pass that test. Others, like myself, we believe it's more of an internal working. It's more of a psychological working. So I would say that the spell that I did to get that job or to pass that test was an internal working. It was an internal thing that gave me more confidence. It made me more presentable, or it helped me to retain that information.
Ken, I have a question for you. Are there spells that can actually change reality?
I think when most people hear magic and they think about witches and they think about ceremonial magicians, things come to mind like, say, Merlin or Harry Potter or Hollywood portrayal of magic. So people who aren't familiar with witchcraft and how people like myself perform magic, they may, perceive that we're all around a cauldron and we're tossing toads and various things into this bubbling brew that's green and toxic and smoky. And that's not how it is. We don't change reality. Like, somebody doesn't wiggle their nose and suddenly a bunny appears. Everything in reality will be affected through reality. What I mean by that is that, let's say you do a spell to win the lottery. So there's certain numbers that you want to come up in that lottery. So you would do spell work to win the lottery. It doesn't mean that you're going to suddenly get the winning ticket in your hand. That's not going to happen. Stuff is not going to come into reality. But what you hopefully will do through your spell work is that you will influence your luck. You will influence various things that take a route to have you win that lottery. I hope I'm explaining this well. It's a path that has to align to reality for the event to occur. If you are trying to do spell work for something that there is no possible way in reality could ever happen, it's not going to happen. At least I've never experienced it. You have to work within the bounds of reality.
That was going to be my question, actually. I was going to ask, about the scale of this magic. Is there a limit? And I think you've just sort of answered that. So if I ask, could you turn a bar of chocolate into a bar of gold?
Right.
There's no pathway for that in reality. So that would be something that you would say is impossible. Have I got that right?
Yeah, exactly. You have to work within the bounds of reality. Now, there are stories of alchemists. People believe that alchemists could turn lead into gold, or they could manufacture gold. And Obviously, with chemistry that we understand today, there was a lot of things that they could change. They could change various components into other components or make various things happen and things explode or smoke or whatever. And so alchemists were considered to be magicians. Same thing with blacksmith. Blacksmiths were considered to be magicians because they're able to transform. They're able to take a base substance and transform and change things into other things. But as for being able to change a chocolate bar into a gold bar, no. No.
I guess my next question is going to be, is there a scale of abilities? Is there somebody out there that has more magic with a K on than you? Or is it just available to anybody to harness? Or would you say that some practitioners are more skilled in that?
Yes and no. I think that, for example, let's say that you're into music. There may be some people who are really interested in music, but they're just not that good at it, you know? Maybe they're just not dedicated enough. They don't practice enough. Maybe they just don't have a good sense of rhythm. They just don't have a good ear for music, but they still want to practice music. They can still learn how to play music. They can still practice it. However, there may be some people, like, people who are successful, but they're really into music. They practice a lot. They have a good ear for music. They have a good sense of rhythm. And so they kind of almost have an advantage to playing music. It's the same thing with magic. Anybody can practice it. However, there are some people who are just more in tune with it. They're just better skilled at it. And then there's other people that have to work a little harder at it. They have to put in a little more time. And sometimes what it really comes down to is just a lot of people, they just don't practice. They don't do enough meditation. They don't do daily exercises. They don't perform rituals of concentration or just rituals in general. When you're performing the ceremonies and rituals, there's words and actions that you do. And the very first thing you have to do is you have to memorize that. You have to memorize it so that when you are in the moment, when you're in a ritual, it flows very smoothly. You don't have to sit there and go back and consult like, oh, okay, I have to concentrate, I have to dedicate this, or I have to do this, or I have to do that. You already know it's going to happen. So it's much easier for it to flow for you. And so you're able to divert your attention away from focusing on the ritual, and you can focus your attention on the outcome of what you want to happen. You can concentrate on getting that job that you want or passing that test that you're going to take.
So I suppose a question that everybody listening is going to be screaming out for us to ask is, have you got an example of when you have used magic to achieve something and it's paid off?
Yes, I do. I have several. The one that really sticks out is when I moved back to San Francisco. I was living in a place across the bay called Walnut Creek, and I wanted to move back to San Francisco. And I wanted to get an apartment that had a window that was facing east, and I wanted to have somewhat of a view. Now, in San Francisco, rent is incredibly, incredibly expensive. It's very rare to find a room with a view in San Francisco without paying an arm and a leg. I'm not rich. I'm working class. I don't have a lot of money. So I was very lucky to get an apartment. And when I went in to go and look at the apartment, it had a window that was facing east and had a view. And I had previously done a ritual to find a place like that. And I believe that that spell that I had somehow influenced the outcome of me finding that apartment. Now, could I have found that apartment without doing the spell? Of course, absolutely. That is a possibility. However, that's not the way that that line of reality worked out for me. The line of reality that worked for me was I did the spell and I got that particular apartment. I don't have an alternate experience to fall back on. That was my experience. So I believe that that was magically influenced. I've had little flashes of insight that aren't necessary. It's not like I went into a ritual to have this outcome happen, but I have had flashes of insights. For example, I was standing on the street with a friend of mine and we were sitting there talking, and for some reason I just thought, oh shit, I hope a pigeon doesn't shit on me, because we were standing under a roof under a building here in San Francisco. And I moved out of the way, and exactly where I was standing, a pigeon shit and it hit the ground. So that was incredibly lucky. I mean, it could have been a coincidence. So everything that happens to me, I understand, can be explained in different ways. So it's not like I sit there and go, oh, magic did it. I know it did it. I know there's other possibilities, but in my experience, I'm 53 years old. I've been studying witchcraft and the occult since I was 13 years old. And I've stuck with it for as long as I have because it gives me something. I get something out of my practice. Even if we took everything away, even if we took magic completely out of the picture, I enjoy my path. I enjoy concentrating, focusing, meditating, and doing ritual. It is what I enjoy doing.
So, Ken, obviously, you've told us some stories there. It's really interesting. If anybody was interested in this particular subject, how would they be able to start researching this? I mean, obviously, you've told us where we can find you on YouTube. Perhaps if you want to shout your YouTube channel out again, that would be great. But how would a novice person wanting to get into this, how would they go about finding a way into the pagan side of things?
Well, like I had mentioned earlier, under that umbrella, there's a lot of different practices out there. I think the very first thing to do is look within yourself, like what it is that you believe about the world. What are your kind of beliefs? Do you believe that there's a single monotheistic deity out there that runs everything? Or are you a polytheist? Do you think there's multiple gods out there? Are you a pantheist? Do you believe the universe is alive? Or do you take a more atheistic approach that you don't believe that there is any deities out there or deity? It really depends upon what you believe and then finding something that aligns to your beliefs. Now, there's a lot of people who study witchcraft, paganism, who get into it and then they find out, this isn't for me. This is not the path that I enjoy. That's fine. Move on to something else. I'm not going to chastise you or think anything different of you just because you change paths or you find out that paganism isn't for you. That's not the point of it. The point of it is to find something that resonates with you. If a certain practice doesn't resonate with you, why do it? It's like it doesn't make any sense to me. But a good way to do it is to, like, for example, let's say you're interested in witchcraft. Now there are a ton of videos out there on witchcraft. So you could just type in YouTube, say witchcraft, and a lot of stuff is going to come up. I think the majority of it is just nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. It doesn't really talk about it from a I don't want to say rational, but it doesn't fairly describe it. I think it's a good place to start, but the next place to go after that would be to research books. Maybe go to your local library, or if you have a tablet, you could download PDFs of various books and do some research. A good place to start would be with maybe Gerald Gardner. Maybe Wicca isn't a path for you, witchcraft. Maybe you're into the more reconstructionist form of witchcraft. So you could start with the term witchcraft and then from there hone in and maybe find out if you're more of a traditional witch or if you're a Gardnerian witch or an Alexandrian witch. It's kind of like Christianity, where everybody has the base beliefs, like maybe everybody who practices Christianity believes in the deity, but then from there you kind of break it down to Catholicism, Lutheranism, all these other various branches of Christianity. That's kind of how paganism as an umbrella term has evolved to today. There's pagan beliefs, and then under that umbrella, then you can get more specific, more specific, more specific. So you may want to study paganism and then find yourself drawn towards witchcraft, and then from there maybe you're drawn towards Gardnerian witchcraft. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess it does. Thank you very much. Kat?
I just want to say before we let Ken go that I've been fascinated listening to that, and it's certainly opened my eyes and given me a whole better understanding of a topic that I really had zero understanding about, to be honest. I do feel a lot more clued in on that now. So Ken, can I just say thank you so much for coming? But for now, can we say thank you very much and goodbye?
Thank you so much, gentlemen. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. So again, thank you so much. If you're interested, my channel is Hellbound Heathen, and you can find me on YouTube. Thank you so much.
Well, that was an interesting guest there, Kat. What's your opinion on what you've just heard?
Well, first of all, his interpretation of magic was so different to what I was expecting. I mean, I've never spoken to a wizard before or a witch or anyone who claims to practice magic. So I came in with a preconceived idea that a magician or a wizard will claim to be able to do things that are literally just impossible, like turn invisible or turn water into wine, that kind of thing, which Ken made very clear wasn't something that his magic was capable to do. The way that Ken sent the message of his magic over to me was that it was more about just psychological well-being. It was a series of practices, whether it would be meditation or ritual or whatever, just to put him in a better frame of mind so he could function in a more confident manner. And I don't class that personally as magic, but I totally understand the thought process behind that, and I totally support it. I think anything that can put you in a more confident mental state is going to result in you performing better. And as a result of you performing better and more confidently, you are going to be more successful. So when it comes to that, I totally believe everything that Ken has said there. We may use different terminology for it. I may use terminology like psychology as opposed to magic, but I totally buy into everything he said there. One of the other things I want to pick up was, for example, the story when he talked about the bird nearly pooing on his head, and did magic play a part in him being able to sense that and move out the way? Well, a really interesting paper that I think will be worth reading is a paper written by Donna J. Bridge on how memory works. And Donna J. Bridge, her work is often linked with the term remembering. She carried out an experiment to show that when people remember something, what they are actually remembering is the last time they remembered something. So what I mean by that is, if I remember going to a football match when I was a child, if I try and remember that now, I'm not actually remembering going to the football match when I was a child. I'm just recalling the last version of that memory I created. So Donna Bridge put forward some very, very strong evidence that every time we remember something, we actually give our brain a little bit of a chance to fill in some gaps that we might have forgotten and to change that memory. And it's that changed memory that we keep remembering. Now, when people hold some very strong significance to a past event like magic and dodging the bird poo, for example, if that story's been remembered over and over and over and over again and maybe changed subtly over and over and over again, we may start to develop a higher significance to something which at the time itself wasn't actually that significant. But because we remember it over and over and over in our own memories, it becomes more significant. So I'd urge people to go and have a look at that paper and see what they think, see if that's relevant to the story at all. But overall, I really enjoyed listening to Ken. I took a lot from it. He's totally changed my mind on what I thought magic was. I thought before he came on, to be honest, it was something that I would never really have any time for. But he really did change my mind on that. So I would say everything Ken has said there is actually very believable, and I really enjoyed having him on. Ranty, what do you think?
Well, for me, Katz, you know me, I'm very open to all this kind of phenomena. So when somebody comes along and talks about magic, then I'm very interested in that. Now, Ken talks about being able to mentally and psychologically perceive things differently, and whether or not you can actually will that into existence or not is open to interpretation. But there was things that were alluded to, particularly things whether or not you could actually change things in reality. Now, I have a belief that back in the olden times, if you go back 500 years or 1,000 years, maybe even further than that, the beliefs back then were more in the realms of being able to change things physically. So they did have people, shamans, things like that. They did have druids that were able to perform magic and maybe manipulate the laws of reality in a way that we haven't been able to experience in the modern age. Now, whether or not that's down to the fact that with this new technology, we don't rely upon this type of magic to enhance our day-to-day existence, but back then they needed to do that. They needed to have an ability to tap into an ability to actually change their reality for the better. Now, I believe that that was possible. I believe that the Druids did have that kind of skill, if you can call it a skill. Whether or not you believe that, Katz, I don't know. But for me personally, I do believe that. I do believe there are still practitioners today that can do this. I have heard stories from other people that have contacted me in the past that have told me that this is a very real thing, that there are people that are able to change things in reality. Now, that's very different to what Ken's saying with his form of Wicca and how he practices it, but that doesn't mean that it still isn't possible. So when the bird tried to poo on him and he moved out of the way, again, I feel that he was in some way tapping into this mystical sixth sense that people have spoken about in the past. Now, you may have experienced this yourself if you've been walking down the street at night, somebody's walking up behind you, you get this sensation that somebody's walking up behind you. Now, your eyes are pointing forward. Everything that you're doing is looking forward and experiencing things in front of you, but to actually sense somebody behind you, that is something that you just can't explain. But more often than not, you'll turn around and somebody will be there. Now, all of us have this ability as a human species to actually tap into that, but we don't tap into it because we don't need to tap into it anymore. We have grown as a race and we have left that ability behind. But I do believe there are still practitioners that do actually tap into that and do use this. So for me personally, I really, really enjoyed the way Ken does his practicing, let's say, and the fact that he wants to train his mind to think in a better way. But as for the real magic, I believe that it's definitely there.
Well, you've heard what I've had to say, and you've heard what Ranty's had to say. If you want to have your say, if you check out the links in the description to this podcast, you'll see where you can find us on social media. Please come and let us know. And if you've got a story of your own, please let us know there as well, and we would love to have you on. But for now, I'm getting a little bit too hot in this pit, Ranty. I don't know about you, but I'm going to take a break and go home.
Yeah, it's far too hot for me anymore, and I'm exiting too. So thank you very much, cats, and we'll see you all in the next one.